Before going into the panel discussion, I would ask the gentleman who was patient enough to keep his question on Helix Nebula and ESA. If the question still is unresolved after Johan's.
Richard Sykes from the UK Cloud Industry Forum. My question essentially was this. The Nebula project, very much based on multi-tenancy, with communities at times that be quite defensive of their particular scientific data or things like that they need to protect. So it suggests to me that you are successfully establishing that it is very possible to operate in a multi-tenancy environment successfully. And that's a very important message for government services, that they should relax and operate on private sector public clouds that are multi-tenanted, because it is possible now to deliver multi-tenancy securely, effectively, and still protecting privacy. And that's very important from the point of view of the productivity of the underlying computing assets. That's a question for comment on.
Okay, I'm not sure I got the question properly. You are speaking about multi-tenancy. Yes, this is what we are putting in place. The data, you had a question, I'm sorry, can you...
The question is, you're establishing the principle that you can successfully operate a multi-tenancy environment in which people who have privacy concerns for particular areas of data can nonetheless have those privacy concerns addressed. And that's a very important principle to establish more widely, because if it's applied in government, if government moves to happiness to use multi-tenancy public cloud environments, that's a very big shift in productivity in the use of computing assets for government.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, we have different data policy that on the data we put online. Some needs privacy, some are commercial, some are free. ESA data are open on free data policy, so they can be met on. All this has to be understood by all the players. When we move from one provider to the other provider into this marketplace, they have to follow the data policies, has to follow the data themselves. And yes, there's a lot of work being done on this. But this is key to success, because we need this if we want to have all kind of science data there. Some are very private, and some are of commercial value.
And I think that's the essential point which I wanted to get very clear, because I think the principle of accepting multi-tenancy very widely across public cloud by government and the enterprise private sector is a very key principle to get established.
We have a further question to the panel.
Yes, I'm from the government myself, and I would like to elaborate on the question of multi-tenancy, because from a deeply technical point of view, I'm very suspicious of how you can do reliable multi-tenancy in a virtualized infrastructure. Because with the sharing of storage, the sharing of network resources, and the sharing of memory and processing capacity, what are the technologies to keep those domains really separate and to keep them as reliably separate as, for example, physical or cryptographical separation of domains? So are there any technologies that are as trustworthy as these already existing solutions? I hope I've made myself clear.
Yes, the only thing is that I'm not that technical to be able to answer all your questions. Well, what I know is that the providers are working very hard on solving all these issues, because we put very big issues on the table. One of the future pilot that should join is one that would like to put 1 petabyte of data on the cloud, and to move 1 petabyte from one cloud to another is very challenging. So the only thing I can do is that unless somebody from the... Okay, Mick would like to...
I'll do this, because I've been working on Helix Nebula as well. I work for Atos. The key players who are providing this infrastructure, many of them are established outsourcing providers who have been delivering private services, and sometimes calling them cloud, to commercial enterprises for the last 10 or 15 years, which has necessarily involved ensuring their privacy and security using things like network virtualization with security mechanisms therein, shared storage environments which have the logical division such that you can ensure that they can't see each other's data and so on. And so all we're doing effectively is providing those techniques into this cloud environment to ensure that, you know, one customer's data is different from another customer's data. This isn't the classic, it's in the cloud and it all belongs to Google nonsense. This is your data. It happens to be in our cloud or in our cloud, but it's still your data and only you can determine what happens to it. And those techniques are, you know, well known within the outsourcing business. And it's the same with T-systems and so on.
I would also hand over that question as it relates to security and trust to other panelists like Inisa, Vangelis.
Yes, I think the problem is not the technology itself, is how we use the technology to make this happen. And there are good practices and bad practices. Overall, there are technologies that can achieve what we are aiming at. But when we go in a federated environments where each component might have different security and privacy measures and requirements, having a solution that is really interoperable and offers an end-to-end privacy and security might be a little bit tricky. And this is something that, for example, could be resolved by having in advance a certification mechanism or a kind of an audit scheme where you resolve this kind of conflicts in privacy and security across the domains. So apparently, my technical opinion is that yes, it's not a matter of technology, but probably is a matter of implementing the technology right.
I now would pick up the term interoperability, as the session is on digital service infrastructure, and pick up also the comment of the one gentleman after the first session on the role of standards. I mean, the cloud communication was speaking of cutting through the jungle of standards. Etsy is doing work on that to see whether it's a jungle or a light forest that doesn't need cutting, and putting the statement of the gentleman a bit more provocative. The industry is moving that fast and doesn't wait for standards. So I would ask the views of the panelists on that aspect in terms of interoperability and whether there are best practices on that.
Well, it's true. We are ahead. And we are developing within Helix Nebula at least some technology to federate clouds. Of course, we are happy to adapt standards when they are there, but if they are not there, we cannot adapt to them. And we might consider to do that later on. That's the real life.
I'm not an expert on standards or technology as such, but primarily the business logic and the economics of that. So when you think about what happens previously, before the convergence of the IT world and the telco world coming together, in the IT world, as we know, most of that happened in the US and the innovation there, and based on de facto standard creation. So not that much about collaboration, which standard you are going to do together with the others. And obviously in Europe, the tradition was much more on that collaboration side. So now when you have that two different worlds coming together, and actually this is a security issue as well, coming together, everyone is looking for new ways actually to come to have some standardization in place that would enhance the market interoperability and then also the, let's say, the global marketplace and market share for those type of services, especially in comparison to some of the, perhaps the Chinese competition.
No, it's unusual that I get sort of grilled when I'm on a panel by the other panelists, but since you decide to do it that way, we're going to do it that way. The exercise Etsy entered into was about, again, doing sort of a photography of what's existing. We worked with about 50 odds standard organizations, not only Etsy. And again, we were not in the production, we were in coordination mode. Now, all the specifications that at the end of the day are some of the pixels of this photography, if you want. I mean, they were not grown, so I don't know how you say this in English, elles n'ont pas poussé hors sol. They were not hydroponics, I think, but I'm not sure it means exactly the same in English. They came from industry. So I have a little bit trouble understanding when you say industry does this and standards does that, because actually if there is not industry behind, there are just simply no standards. I mean, to my knowledge, the people who started writing the specs, be it in CSA, with whom we work, in ETSI, that's for sure, in ITF, in DMTF, in all the organizations we work with, are companies. So I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding of here of the role, the respective roles, etc., of the what is a standard and the role of industry in that.
I'm handing over to Vangelis, as you're even doing meta standards, at least on certification.
Yes, we have great respect for standards, and in several cases, definitely is the right way to go. Our experience with standardization and deployment of standards is that it takes minimum 3 to 4 years to be a useful deployable model in a fast-growing market like the cloud. I don't know if we can afford this, so I understand that there is a jungle of standards, and in all emerging areas there is always a jungle of standards. So what we are advocating is, let's go for good practices, let's go for measures that all agree to, and let's build up the area, building up de facto measures that later, when the market becomes more mature, via standardization bodies like ETSI, are formalized in the form of a standard. So that's my proposal.
We have further questions. Frank first, and then hand over to Frank, please.
Well, I'm just waiting, actually, to ask a question. Do you mind? I have my hand up. And I just want
Sorry, I didn't see it.
Please, because I have the microphone. So, just changing the subject slightly, to Vangelis, great admirer of what Anisa's doing on cloud, in the SIGs. But you made a statement that cloud, in the context of the NIS directive, that cloud infrastructures could be per se critical. And I'd like to push back on that because, just denoting cloud as a critical infrastructure, really what you should be doing is looking at the operator, whether they use cloud or not, in a risk-based approach, and flagging cloud up as critical per se doesn't help any of us. And I don't think there are any cloud providers who welcome that step, because it brings us into the front line of all types of requirements. It slows down delivery. So I'd like, and you're well aware that this is a very controversial proposal, and the scope definition has been narrowed by both the IMCO and the ITRA committees. So maybe you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I recognize that there is this debate, and I have already mentioned it in my presentation. Definitely cloud computing is more for SMEs and the citizens, and this is how it became very successful. And in this area, no doubt, is not about criticality. However, when the model becomes useful for big players and more critical services use cloud, then definitely the infrastructure that supports these critical services by definition becomes critical. So we shouldn't be now black and white and equalize everything to this. On the contrary, my proposal was that there is a small percentage of the cloud that is or will become critical infrastructure in the future. And I'm very sorry if this means extra requirements or additional cost for running this infrastructure, but however, if critical services run on top of this, then definitely we need to be responsible for managing this infrastructure.
An agreement, it's just a matter of what you put first, and whether a nuclear power station uses cloud or not, or a grid, they are critical. And that's the risk-based approach, and cloud falls under that. You're putting the cart before the horse and saying, let's look at cloud as critical in certain circumstances, but it should be the other way around. I agree otherwise.
Good for interesting further discussions. I now would hand over to Frank, then.
Yeah.
Yes. Frank van Dam.
Okay. Frank first.
Frank van Dam, central government of the Netherlands, also working for Cloud for Europe. I have a question about the Helix and Nebula cloud marketplace. I was wondering, with having multiple cloud providers and multiple cloud users, how does the cloud governance work? Is there a role of a cloud broker, a party acting as cloud broker? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, on one of my slides, I did not go into detail. There were something that we call the blue box, and this is the brokerage function. That is allowing the user who wants to buy some services to go on this marketplace. There is a standardized catalog. This means we can compare apples with apples in terms of services. And it also makes a billing system so that you don't have 15 bills afterwards, but only one integrated bill with all the services on the different providers. And there should be atop this identity management, federated identity management. So all these services that needs to be delivered for the users will be in what we call this blue box.
Okay, thank you. Abdelatif Benjelloun from Huawei Technology and also involved in HC Cloud Standard Coordination. So I wanted just to come back to this question of multi-tenancy is very important and to link it to standard. So this problem has been already solved or in the route to be solved in DMTF SVPC, one of the standards of DMTF. And here I link it to the first question that have been asked at the beginning of the session of the importance of standard, if standards are lagging behind de facto standard and fact like that. So facto standards are addressing, or people who are trying to get part of the market are doing that, so we know them all. But still there is big part of the market that is not addressed, and those people have a lot of problems. And this is what the European Commission is trying to do, to solve the problem of these. I don't know which percentage, but let's say 80%. And standards will solve those problems. And the multi-tenancy question that has been addressed now is just an example of that. So people in standard try to solve these problems. So this is the link with this, the question that have been raised this morning.
Okay, so I assume that was more a comment than a question. So I will hand over to
Okay. Yeah. I have two questions. One for Enisa. I mean, if your role is mainly recommendations, can you please elaborate more on your position with respect to certification? My second question is for ETSI. I mean, until now I am not really convinced. I mean, why the role of ETSI is just coordination? I mean, let's say your activities in other fields like next generation networks is well known. Thank you.
So I will take two more, one response there and then a further question.
I must admit I don't quite understand the issue of multi-tenancy, why it comes up so heavily right now. We are talking about the security measures that we can take and operate on since we are talking about virtual machines since the early 70s. So technology is there. The question is, can it be sort of transferred into the cloud arena? And as many experiments have shown already, it is there. So I don't understand why we are so heavily involved in this discussion.
I'm taking that comment and then the final one for the final round with the panel.
Okay, maybe you don't like the final comment.
We'll see.
My question is completely different. What I'm lacking here and what I'm missing here, I see a lot of fragments. Have you got something like an architecture? Have you got a business plan? Have you got an organization to drive all this? Eventually, there will be people who have to take over the services and have to do something. I hear about projects, some of them are almost finished, others are in the starting. How do you synchronize these efforts? Where is the plan? I think this is a function of the EU, that she makes a master plan for it, that she has got an architecture on a timeline. We are in time zero, let's call it. And I think every year you should add something. I'm sorry, I'm coming from the commercial world, not from the public sector. And it makes me pretty sick, I must say, if I say not another fragment and another fragment, and we are spending lots of money taxpayers' money. I'm sorry. But
okay, so we have two provocative comments, which I will hand over to the panel to lead the discussion over to the coffee break.
If I go first, I'm also from the commercial world originally. So the thing is that, for instance, with the FIPPP, one of the first tasks that I did is that I combined the work within the program so that they are now working on business modeling and being able to help the SMEs when they come to us and ask about the standards for the future Internet PPP and what type of elements there are and how they are actually trying to make some out of it, how it will fit into their specific industry or into their specific type of an organization. We're not ready yet, but we have started that work and we're really pushing that type of a model for the other PPPs in the Horizon 2020 as well. The thing is that I think one of the reasons also why I wanted to come here is that since we have an FIPPP program that has invested quite a lot of funds and come forward with a technology platform of enablers also for the cloud services, I think it would make sense to utilize that in another EU initiative as well.
Yes, so there is two things. Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. What we're trying with the Helix Nebula initiative is to bring all these pieces together. We have a strategic plan, we have a business model, we know where we want to go, we want it to be sustainable, this is why we work with industry. And we are also federating the investment that have been done by the Commission, like with Ingéant, with EGI. We are also discussing with EUDAT, we are discussing with PRACE. So all this big investment made by the Commission so that we could try to reuse all this money and also all these small FP7 projects that after 2 years, after financing is finished, they go in a box, it's a nice report, but nothing is done afterwards. These, at least those that relates to what our domain in Earth observation, in ESA, we try to bring them on board with all what they have developed, and there are some very, very interesting that has commercial value at the end if they are put in the right environment with the right business model, and this is what we are trying to do. So we are trying to do a part of it, not all of it, but a part of it.
it's trying, huh?
Thank you. So it's
sorry, there were a question over there about ESA, but the role, you wanted to know the role of ESA in this Helix Nebula? Sorry? In ESA.
That was to
sorry.
I would hand it over to the coffee break because I think it's up to me to thank the panelists for inspiring presentations and keynotes and thank the audience for even more inspiring discussions.